Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's virtual program with Turnstile Tours. I am Andrew Gustafson, and happy Fleet Week, which is what we're here to celebrate today. We're going to give people just a couple more minutes to continue joining, but welcome everybody. And just a quick reminder, some housekeeping items if you're joining us for the first time. We really want to encourage discussion, so please drop any questions you have into the chat throughout today's program. We also have closed captioning available, which you can turn on or off down at the bottom of your screen. So normally I would be down underneath the Verrazano Bridge for the arrival of the ships of Fleet Week. They came pretty early this year, though, because of the tides. So the ships were coming in around 7 o'clock. So I wasn't able to get myself out of bed this morning and check it out. But I'm looking forward to go and visit the ships, both from the water and from the land. And we're going to talk about that, how you can participate and engage with the events of Fleet Week, which is returning after a 2-year hiatus. So that's going to be the topic today. But we're also going to talk about the historical origins of Fleet Week, and which goes all the way back to the 19th century, and other examples of what we call fleet reviews that have taken place in the New York City. So what are the antecedents to Fleet Week that we're celebrating right now? But let's dive into today's program and talk a little bit about, what is Fleet Week? How did it start? And what are the ways that you can participate and engage? Because we're going to talk a lot about the ships today, but really, Fleet Week is about the people. We have less than 10 ships that are visiting this year, but we have more than 2,500 military personnel that are visiting, both the Navy, Coast Guard, and the Marine Corps. And it's really about celebrating them and showing them a good time in New York City. And so there are a lot of events that are happening to support them. And it's also an opportunity for a lot of them to see their families. A lot of them are from the New York area, and so this gives them an opportunity to connect and relax with them as well. So that's really what the week is all about. It's about showing off our city and showing these service members a good time while they're here. But let's dive in and talk a little bit about how Fleet Week started. So we're going to kind of do the program in two parts. So we're going to talk about some of those historical antecedents and how examples of the fleet in much larger numbers coming to visit New York for a number of different reasons. Some of them were like today, sort of it's a marketing event. It is, like I said, it's a family event in many ways. But the fleet actually coming to New York, in some cases, actually serve a practical purpose for the Navy that we're going to talk about. Then we're going to talk about the actual ships that are here today. And although it's a small contingent that we have in town, there are some really interesting ships there, and they actually tell us quite a bit about the current state of the Navy and the Coast Guard, and also some of the problems that they're facing in terms of their operations, the design of ships, and also the structure of those forces. Some of them are long-term problems that have the fixes, unfortunately, are going to be a long way off. So we're going to talk about kind of what the future of the Navy and the Coast Guard looks like as well, through the examples of these ships that are here. Okay, so let's start kind of at the beginning. There are many examples of large numbers of Navy ships, Navy squadrons coming to visit New York. But one of the first examples where we had a really large-scale review of a pretty substantial portion of the United States Navy was in 1898, and that was following the Spanish-American War. And so here we can see this image showing American ships coming in. I think this is the Hudson River, if I'm not mistaken, on August 21st, 1898. So this was one of America's first kind of great naval victories, over a European power. And so they wanted to show off all of America's kit. And a big celebration of America's new position, really as an imperial power, as they gained possession of new overseas territories in the Philippines, Cuba, and Puerto Rico. Um, and so the Spanish-American War was such a big deal that we actually had two big fleet reviews, because the hero of the Battle of Manila Bay, Admiral George Dewey, actually wasn't here for this big fleet review. He actually wouldn't come back to New York until the following year. And so the arrival of Admiral Dewey was maybe even a bigger affair than this fleet review that happened in 1898. Dewey's arrival in New York was such a huge deal that there were a number of monuments, though temporary ones, erected for his visit. And so here we can see this looks a lot like the arch in Madison Square Park, or excuse me, the arch in Washington Square Park, or perhaps the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Arch in Grand Army Plaza. This one is in Madison Square Park, and if you know Madison Square Park, there is not a triumphal arch that is there. That's because this one was built temporarily, and it's actually made out of wood and plaster. And so this was only here for about 3 years. I think in 1902, it had, started to show quite a bit of wear, being out there in the weather for 3 years and being made out of plaster. So eventually it was demolished. It sort of had a counterpart piece, because this was obviously a big feature of the parade, the victory parade that was done for Admiral Dewey on land. There was also a parade of ships that was done out in the harbor, and there was sort of a counterpart piece to the triumphal arch, which was this float called Victory. While the arch in Madison Square Park, lasted 3 years, this one lasted, I think, barely 3 days. As you can see, this is just the day after. Or actually, this photo was taken the day of that procession, and you can see that a large section of it over here has been broken off. So it had a big winged Victory statue on it that caught the wind in a disadvantageous position, and it actually blew the wings off and tore off large sections of it. So this was demolished shortly after it was constructed, again made entirely out of wood and plaster. So the Spanish-American War is sort of the United States entry onto the world stage. And we would begin a rapid expansion of the Navy, starting under President Roosevelt. Of course, that was capped in his presidency by the Great White Fleet sailing around the world. But at this time, naval technology was evolving very, very rapidly. And even the brand new ships the United States had built, in the first decade of the 20th century, by the end of that decade, they were completely obsolete. So we are spending a huge amount of money, as are our counterparts in Britain and Germany, to build the most modern, up-to-date fleet of battleships. And so they wanted to show them off. And so we would have a major fleet review again in 1912 of some of these newer ships. And again, just 3 years later in 1915. And so these were commonplace, and many of these, including this one, were actually viewed by the president. So in that case, it was an official fleet review, meaning the fleet was being reviewed by the commander-in-chief, the president. And so these would happen periodically in New York. During the presidency of Theodore Roosevelt, they would actually happen frequently. Well, they happened a few times at his home out in Oyster Bay. So just a few miles outside the city on the North Shore of Long Island. They would actually bring the Navy out there so the president could review it from his house, essentially. And so, we have this era of the battleship expansion. Then we have World War I, and the United States Navy plays a very small role in World War I, which we actually did an entire program about. So we'll drop a link so you can check it out on the show page. But then we go into a period of pretty prolonged austerity, where the shipbuilding program from the pre-war period is really pared back a lot. And the United States signs a series of naval treaties, the Washington Naval Treaty in 1922 and the London Naval Treaty in 1930, that really curtail especially battleship construction. And so that really alters the shape of the Navy, the size of the Navy, obviously. And so we're not having these big reviews so much, but there is an important thing that's happening in this interwar period, even up until the late 1930s, when we begin a large expansion of the Navy in the lead up to World War II. There is an important thing that's happening during this time, and the Navy is learning and evolving, even if it's not building all the ships that it wants to build. And that is something called the fleet problems. So the fleet problems were a series of exercises that were done in the 1920s and 30s, where they would actually assemble a large portion of the U.S. Navy in one place, and they would do war games. And so this was sort of a reflection, number one, of what were the kind of strategic concerns of the United States at the time. Many of those war games revolved around potential war with Japan. And they were also a reflection of the naval doctrine at the time, which was to amass the fleet in force in one place. And so bringing all of the ships together in one place was, an important part of that doctrine. And so this revolved around, the idea of that, you wanted to amass in force and destroy your opponent's navy in force. So sort of this idea of the decisive fleet battle that was developed by Alfred Thayer Mahan and other naval theorists as well. We don't need to go into all of the naval theory about it, but the important part is that this was a period of time when actually the fleet visiting New York was not just a sort of propaganda or marketing exercise. It was actually an important part of the naval operations and training. And this one that happened in 1934, this was one of the largest assemblages of ships. There were over 80 ships that came during this fleet review in May 1934. They were actually just wrapping up something called Fleet Problem 15. And so coming to New York was actually part of that exercise. And so this fleet actually sailed all the way from San Diego, and they went to the Panama Canal, which is where the fleet exercise was, where the fleet problem exercise was focused around, was defending the Panama Canal. And also seeing if you could get the entire fleet through the Panama Canal and how quickly you could do it. So they actually moved the entire fleet of over 100 ships through the Panama Canal in less than 48 hours. So it was a successful exercise, and then they steamed it all the way up to New York. So this was sort of the culmination of that several week-long exercise of Fleet Problem 15. Many of these fleet problems in the 1920s, but especially in the 1930s, also revolved around integrating and effectively using aviation, which was a relatively new concept at the time and was evolving, again, very, very rapidly, just as the battleships and their designs had been evolving very rapidly 25, 30 years before. This is a period when we're seeing, tremendous innovation in naval aviation. And so part of this fleet review in 1934, we actually had 3 aircraft carriers that came and visited: the Saratoga, the Lexington, and then the Langley, all visited New York during this time period. And so, during this time, we have somewhat sort of sporadic visits. There was no Fleet Week. There was a Navy Day, which used to be celebrated in October, but there was no Fleet Week. And so, we had a big visit in 1922, 1930, this one in 1934. And then, of course, we're not having Fleet Week during World War II, because every day is Fleet Week, because New York was, one of the biggest naval towns in the country, with the Brooklyn Navy Yard and the port of embarkation and everything happening here. So really the next kind of big fleet event we have is the end of World War II, when 48 ships came and visited in October 1945. And you can see them arrayed along the Hudson River. That was the typical configuration during this time period. Line them all up along sort of the upper half of Manhattan on the Hudson River side. And so again, this was reviewed by President Truman, and part of the festivities in this Navy Day celebration in 1945 was also the commissioning of a new aircraft carrier, the USS Franklin D. Roosevelt, at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And so, like Fleet Week today, you know, a lot of these ships were open for the public to visit. Here you can see them again, arrayed along the Hudson River, and then they would go, you know, they would do the review up the river and then come down the river to where the piers are concentrated, really below 50th Street. To park, and many of them could be visited by people, among them the USS Missouri, which of course everybody wanted to visit because that was the site of the signing of the instrument of surrender, ending the war. Here you can see a ship called the USS Renshaw pulled up alongside it. This is not typical painting on the side of a ship, but they did this for this Navy Day in 1945, so that the public could clearly see which ship was which. We actually, I remember many years ago, we had a veteran of the USS Renshaw who came on a tour. And I think we posted, I'll post it on the show page. We posted a little interview that we did with him on our blog. This was many years ago. But anyway, so this was obviously one of the highlights. Hundreds of thousands of people came to visit the Missouri in a 1-week period. And this is what the sailors referred to as the Battle of New York, because it was just basically chaos. You have to remember too, this is in October of 1945. This is you know, only about 6 or 7 weeks after the war is officially over. The ship is still very much sort of on a war footing. They have not, you know, put in, you know, handrails and, you know, ramps or anything really to accommodate the public. It's, you know, a working warship. And so it was quite chaotic. And sailors reported that basically everything that could be pulled off or unscrewed from the ship was stolen, including an attempt to steal the actual plaque that was placed on the deck shortly after the instrument of surrender was signed on September 2nd, marking the spot where that took place. This is at the Battleship Missouri Museum in Pearl Harbor. So yeah, someone tried to you know, pry it off the deck. Although I don't think this is the same plaque. If I recall correctly, what they told us at the museum, this is not the same plaque that was there in 1945. It's been replaced, or there are multiple plaques. Can't remember the exact details of that. But anyway, kind of crazy to imagine someone trying to steal that. Okay, so you know, and then throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s, you know, we would have periodic events where ships would obviously visit New York all the time. It was a major port of call, you know, because of the Brooklyn Navy Yard. You also, you know, had the Navy base over in Bayonne, New Jersey. But really, the antecedent to the Fleet Week tradition that we have today is OpSail 86. So 1986 was a huge event. It didn't take place over Memorial Day. It actually took place over the 4th of July. And so there was a huge assembly of ships, not just Navy ships, but it was an international fleet review. So we had, you know, ships from a number of allied navies, including in this photo, you can see just behind the John F. Kennedy, you can see this is the HMS Ark Royal right over here. And also there were lots of tall ships and people coming with their own, you know, pleasure boats and sailboats. You can see that the harbor was actually absolutely packed. The other event, other than it being 4th of July, that was being celebrated was the centenary of the Statue of Liberty. And shortly before that, we had the completion of the remodeling of the Statue of Liberty in 1986. So this was a huge event. It was attended by a famous ship with New York City connections, which is the USS Iowa. So this was kind of also an important celebration of uh, the Iowa battleship refit program, not just of the USS Iowa, but its sister ships, the Missouri, the Wisconsin, and the New York. Excuse me, the Iowa, the Missouri, the New Jersey, and the Wisconsin. Victoria asks about the bicentennial. That's a good question. Maybe some folks remember 1976. And Victoria mentions that she was there for both. But 1986 was an important year because this was in the midst of President Ronald Reagan's. Yes, that's right. Howie mentions that there was also op sale in 1976 for the bicentennial. That's right. So the Iowa was part of a program of President Reagan to build what was called the 600 ship Navy. And so we embarked on a huge shipbuilding program, number one. Number two was refitting older ships, including the Iowa class battleships, which had been built during World War II. And so the USS Iowa and the Missouri were both built at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And so they were modernized and put back into service. This was a very controversial and somewhat problematic program, but this was sort of the big, kind of coming out party for it. And here we can see President Reagan and the First Lady Nancy Reagan on the deck of the USS Iowa on the Hudson River. So why was it problematic and controversial? Here's a great picture. I love this because it's the return of the Iowa to Brooklyn. This is actually parked at Pier 1 in what's today Brooklyn Bridge Park, and you can see the South Street Seaport across the way. I'm not sure what white ship that is. That might be the Bark Eagle, which is the Coast Guard's training ship parked over there. So I just love this picture. So why was it controversial? Well, for a couple of reasons. For one, it is the policy of the Navy. It was back in 1986, and it is today to neither confirm nor deny if a ship is carrying nuclear weapons. And so there was a real possibility that the Iowa, it was equipped with guided missiles that could be carrying nuclear weapons, or other ships that were within its unit, which was called the Surface Action Group. So there was a whole squadron of vessels built around the Iowa. So this drew a lot of criticism from anti-nuclear activists, including those within the New York City Council. So the City Council actually passed a resolution that banned nuclear-powered ships as well, and nuclear-armed ships from visiting New York. Now, this was done by the New York City Council. It has no force of law over the U.S. Navy, but it is technically still on the books in New York. And we've actually never had a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier visit New York. As far as I recall, the only nuclear-powered vessels that have visited New York was a ship called the NS Savannah, which was actually a nuclear-powered commercial ship. But perhaps out of kind of deference to New York, or just because they don't see any reason to do it, we've never had a nuclear-powered vessel visit New York Harbor. But excuse me, this was one of the leaflets that was produced by Riverside Church, which has a long history of peace activism, basically saying, we don't want the Iowa in New York, because not only did the Iowa visit in 1986, they were in the process of building a base for the Iowa on Staten Island. And so that's what's called the Staten Island home port. And so that is where the Surface Action Group would be based. And so there was a lot of local and national opposition to this program. And you can see this poster expresses the fear over there being some kind of nuclear accident that would take place if we had nuclear armed vessels coming into the harbor. Now, the Staten Island home port program, they basically constructed the pier and not much else on the site because that program was scrapped really for two reasons. The first was the accident that happened aboard turret number 2 on the USS Iowa in April 1989 when it was conducting firing exercises. That explosion killed 48 sailors and put the Iowa out of commission and really, threw into question the entire battleship refit program. Um, the second thing was, of course, the end of the Cold War. And so there was really no need to have this major base and these very, very expensive battleships to operate. So eventually, the entire Staten Island home port program was scrapped, and the Iowa class battleships were put back into mothball. And now all four of them are a museum. So the USS Iowa is in San Pedro, California, in Los Angeles. We have the USS Missouri, which is in Pearl Harbor. The USS Wisconsin is in Norfolk, Virginia, and the closest one to us is the USS New Jersey, which is down in Camden, New Jersey. So that was kind of the end of that. But we'll talk a little bit more about the Staten Island home port in a couple minutes. But 1986, we have OpSail, we have this big kind of event. 87, they skipped a year, but 1988 was when they decided to really build on that momentum. And Fleet Week has operated pretty much continuously since then. We've had a couple hiccups. One of them was in 2011 when they canceled Fleet Week. And the reason for that, or was it 2000? Getting my years confused. I think it was 2012, but it was because of the 2011 budget sequester. So basically, when they put a hard cap on government spending, and so one of the things that they decided to scrap to save money was Fleet Week, and then of course we've now missed 2 years of Fleet Week because of the pandemic. But here you can see this was one of the last visits we had during Fleet Week of a fleet aircraft carrier. I mentioned before, we've never had a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier visit, but we used to have carriers of equivalent size that were conventionally powered. And so this is the Kennedy again, visited in 2001. And then I believe the last time we had a fleet carrier visit was in 2005. But basically, we're continuing this tradition that goes back to 1988. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening right now, because that's the focus of the program. But these are the ships that are visiting. So like I said, we now have 9 ships that are visiting, and 5 of them are open to the public that you can go and tour. So we're going to go through these one by one. They did scale back the program a little bit within the last couple of weeks. We were supposed to have a destroyer visit the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal, but that was canceled. There were a couple other ships that were pulled off the roster as well. So this is who we have visiting. So we have 2 ships of the U.S. Navy, 2 Coast Guard ships, and a ship of the Royal Navy. And then you can see down at the bottom the 4 yard patrol boats of the Naval Academy. So we'll go through these one by one, but you can go and visit them at Pier 88 and Pier 90. Which, if you don't know where that is, I'll tell you a little trick. If you are visiting, or if you're looking for a pier that's north of Houston Street, so the numbered streets, just add 40 to the street, or in this case, subtract 40, and you'll know what street it is. So Pier 88 is on 48th Street, Pier 90 is on 50th Street. So these are right around the Intrepid, which is on 46th Street, or Pier 86. So we'll talk about the USS Bataan and the HMS Protector, and then we'll make our way down to the Staten Island home port, which is in Stapleton, to talk about the 1 Navy ship that's there and the 2 Coast Guard ships. Those yard patrol boats that I mentioned, they're not open to the public, but you can visit basically starting tomorrow through Memorial Day from 8 to 5. Try and get there early because there are typically pretty long lines, especially with fewer ships to visit. There might be a long wait. So prepare yourself for that. Wear sunscreen, bring some water, because they're not very comfortable places to wait out on these piers. You will also note that in Manhattan, there are no visiting hours on Sunday, but on Staten Island, it's going to be Thursday through Monday that they're all open. So let's go through these and talk a little bit about these ships, what they are, what their mission is. But like I said before, what they tell us about the Navy and the Coast Guard in general, and sort of the state of our military and our sea services. Um, so, I mentioned at the top of the program that this all started today with the parade of ships, which comes from the lower bay up the Narrows, and then they dock at their respective spots in Staten Island and in Manhattan. I wasn't able to get up in time to make my way down to the Narrows early this morning, but the last time we had Fleet Week in 2019, I was able to get up extremely early. I think I had to be down in Staten Island at 3 a.m. or something, 3:30, because I was invited to actually be in the parade of ships with this Coast Guard cutter, the Lawrence O. Lawson. So this is what's called a Sentinel class cutter. We'll talk about these a little bit later on. Really important ships in the Coast Guard today. Yeah, so we went out into the lower bay and circled around for about 6 hours waiting for the ships to make their way from Norfolk and join the line and make our way up the Hudson. So it was a really amazing experience, and it was really wonderful to be able to spend time with the Coast Guardsmen on board as well. I was able to do that because I'm a member of the New York Council Navy League, which is a great organization. I want to just give a little pitch for them, but they're a civilian organization that supports the Navy through a number of different programs, including supporting education, junior ROTC, and the Sea Cadets, as well as supporting families in the New York area of service personnel. The Navy League supports not only the folks here in New York, but we also sponsor the ship, the USS New York, which is not based in this area, and also units in Bahrain. The other thing that the Navy League does is education of the public to teach people and about why the Navy and the Coast Guard and the sea services are important for the nation. And so we got invited yesterday to actually, in celebration of the return of Fleet Week, to ring the closing bell at the NASDAQ, which was pretty fun. So you can see me over there on the left, also representing our friends over at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and we'll talk about them and the important role that the Navy Yard actually still plays for the Coast Guard, not the Navy so much. Yeah, so anyway, if you want to learn more or interested, please talk to me. I serve on the membership committee of the New York Council, so happy to share more, but they do a lot of great events. And again, it's really about supporting the service members and young people who are interested in joining the sea services. That includes the Navy, the Coast Guard, as well as the American Flag Merchant Marine. Yeah, so here you can see the parade of ships way out on the horizon. And so as they make their way up and they come under the Verrazano Bridge. So this is always my favorite place to watch the parade of ships, is right underneath the bridge. You can see the USS Cole, which was visiting in 2014. And here's the USS New York, as I mentioned. So this was a ship, it's not here this year, obviously, but it was here in 2019. And it was here in 2011 when it was commissioned. And, it's significant in part because it has a very important connection to New York, in that portions of the steel that were used in the hull were actually salvaged from the World Trade Center site. But let's talk about the ships that are actually visiting here. And so sort of the centerpiece of the event, the really big ship that's visiting is this one, the USS Bataan, which is an LHD-5. So what does that mean? So that stands for Landing Helicopter Dock. This is what we call an amphibious ship. It's part of the so-called Gator Navy. And actually, I'll show my hat right here. I'll stop sharing for a second. You can see my hat up close right here. I got this from when the Bataan visited in 2016, and you can see picture of an alligator right there. So what does that mean? So the Gator Navy are amphibious ships that are used for getting Marines from uh, the ship to shore. And so there are a number of different types of amphibious ships. These are what we call the big deck amphibious ships because they get those Marines to shore by means of both boats as well as aviation. Vertical takeoff and landing airplanes, as well as helicopters and tilt rotor aircraft as well. And so you can see obviously the big deck up here. So it looks a lot like an aircraft carrier, but planes can't take off horizontally from this deck. It's not designed for that. So there's a limited sort of number of aircraft that can operate from it. The other thing that it has is what's called a well deck. So you can actually see that right back here. So they can actually flood the rear part of the ship and drive boats in and out of it for, again, for moving Marines to shore. So, these are sort of the kind of mini aircraft carriers of the US Navy, but they look really, really big actually. And, they're dwarfed in size compared to our big, Nimitz class and Ford class aircraft carriers. But these, would be the flagship of almost any other Navy in the entire world. They're massive ships. Here you can see, how big that flight deck is there. And over here on the left, you can see, one of the special aircraft for it, which is the Osprey, the MV-22, which is what's called a tilt rotor. So you can see the rotors are in the vertical position right here, so it can take off like a helicopter, and then they can tilt forward and it can fly horizontally like an airplane. So it can fly much, much faster than a conventional helicopter. These are important ships. They form the centerpiece of what are called amphibious ready groups that, are on patrol around the world to respond to any situations, again, very similar to a carrier battle group, but with a different mission, obviously, for delivering Marines. But this was a major loss to the United States Navy back in 2022, which was the fire in San Diego aboard the USS Bonhomme Richard, which was basically an accidental fire, but also, caused by a lot of negligence in the maintenance that was going on right there and the storage of materials and stuff like that. And that fire grew so out of control that it destroyed the entire ship. So this ship was a total loss. And so we're in a period right now where the Navy is trying to grow, but unfortunately, because of accidents like this, we also had, the terrible accidents of the two destroyers, separate incidents back in 2017. We had collisions that killed 17 sailors, put them out of commission for a long, long time. We have this Navy that, unfortunately, because of the way that we've built ships and the ships that we've chosen to build over the last 2 decades, they're trying to grow, but they really can't make any progress in terms of expanding the fleet, but they have extremely high operational demands. And so, one of the things that you will probably see if you go and visit the fleet, the ships of Fleet Week, is sadly a lot of rust. And that's just a product of the fact that, sailors are really working harder and longer hours than ever, and the ships are asked to do more than they've ever been asked to do because of the constraints on the size of the ships. And we obviously have a lot of, the Navy has a lot of responsibilities around the world, carrying out various missions, including, collaborating and protecting our allies and interests around the world. So, that's unfortunately, this, incidents like this are sort of in some ways the product of, bad shipbuilding policy and this increased operational tempo that we've seen. But we'll get back to more problems in the Navy, but I wanted to just wrap up the other ships that we have visiting Manhattan. And this is an interesting one and a pretty cool one. I don't know that we've seen, at least as part of Fleet Week in recent years, a ship like this come and visit. But this is the HMS Protector. So HMS, Her Majesty's ship, which is a ship of the Royal Navy. of the United Kingdom. And so this is a polar survey ship, which supports primarily its mission is to support the British Antarctic Survey, which is the permanent British mission in Antarctica. Just like the United States has a permanent presence in Antarctica and our main station at McMurdo Sound, the British also have interest in Antarctica, and this ship does a lot of the scientific research and survey work in that region, and doing a lot of monitoring, obviously for climate change, which is accelerating more visibly in many parts of the polar region. But it also does go to the North Pole as well. So I'm really excited to go and visit this ship. It's pretty cool. It is technically an icebreaker, but it is not what we call a heavy icebreaker. So this cannot plow through ice of any thickness. I think it's rated for ice about 20 inches thick, which is pretty thick, but ice can be several feet thick, and dozens of feet thick, the sea ice in the polar regions. So anyway, it's cool. I'm excited to go and see this. I wanted to talk a little bit about the American counterparts, because you can actually see some of them in New York Harbor on a pretty regular basis. So, but we should talk a little bit about icebreakers, because this is actually one of the big concerns and challenges of the U.S. Coast Guard right now. So, obviously the United States is an Arctic nation. We can't forget about Alaska. And so to maintain navigation, those many ports and sea lanes in Alaska do freeze. And so they need to be broken up by the Coast Guard. We also, again, have a permanent station in Antarctica, McMurdo Sound, which can really only be reached in the wintertime by a heavy icebreaker. The United States only has one heavy icebreaker, which is this one called the USCGC Polar Star. We also have what's classified as a medium icebreaker, which is called the Healy. And then we have a third one, a heavy icebreaker, which is completely out of commission because its engines are dead. So this has been a priority for the Coast Guard to recapitalize, that they call that, which means building new ships, basically, to recapitalize the icebreaker fleet. So there are 3 icebreakers that are slated for construction. One is currently under construction at a company called VT Halter Marine, which is down in Louisiana, of all places. And so, they don't have much opportunity to test the sea ice down there. But yeah, so this has been a priority for the Coast Guard to bring back that capability for ice breaking, heavy ice breaking especially. But we have smaller icebreakers right here in New York Harbor. This is the Sturgeon Bay, a ship we've talked about before, because one of our former colleagues, Ramon Ortiz, actually served on board this ship. And so, when you look at ships of the U.S. Navy that have that black hull, that means that their primary mission is about navigation. And so the Sturgeon Bay, will, in the summer months, will tend to aids to navigation, buoys and things like that. And also, do various sort of environmental protection missions and other things. But in the wintertime, its main mission is keeping the Hudson River free of ice. So it is an icebreaker that will go as far up the river as Albany, keeping the shipping lanes clear, especially for tugs and barges, especially those carrying home heating oil. That's actually a big activity that's done in the harbor. Or excuse me, done along the Hudson River, and so that's what the Sturgeon Bay is tasked with. And then, the last group of boats that we have visiting Manhattan are what are called the yard patrol boats. You can see one from the parade of ships in 2019, and in front of it we have a tugboat up here. We can get a closer look at them right here. So these are based in Annapolis at the Naval Academy, and what they're used for is really training the midshipmen on basic ship handling skills. So basically how to operate a ship. So that's what these are for. So they will not be open to the public, but if you go and visit the Intrepid Museum this week, you can see them parked out there and maybe talk to some of the midshipmen there as well. Okay, so let's shift gears and we'll move down to Staten Island. We'll just run through some of these ships in the last couple minutes that we have here. But again, we have another black hulled ship that's visiting. That is quite different from the ships that we have here locally in New York Harbor. So this is the Sycamore. And this is its primary mission is managing aids to navigation, right? So these are the buoys that mark shipping channels. Those are all maintained by the Coast Guard, and many people don't know that they actually change them out in the wintertime and the summertime, so that they're kind of more durable within the winter months. So they have to swap those out, and that's what that big crane is used for, is moving these aids to navigation. I say this is a little bit different than the type of buoy tenders that we have locally here in New York Harbor, because this is much bigger. It's about twice as large in terms of the displacement. It's 50 feet longer, because these are typically found in much sort of rougher maritime environments, meaning much more open ocean than we have here in New York Harbor, and much rougher seas. So you find them in places like Oregon, Alaska, Guam. This one is actually based locally, but it's a city that basically faces the open ocean, which is Newport, Rhode Island. But this was previously stationed up in Alaska. So its local counterpart, we'll see here, it's a ship we talked about just the other day, and we saw on our virtual program we did of the St. George Ferry, which is the Catherine Walker. So if you compare these two ships, you can see that this one is quite a bit smaller. And so yeah, so that's one of the Coast Guard ships that's going to be visiting. But we also have a white-hulled Coast Guard ship. I don't have a picture of the ship that's actually visiting, which is called the Dependable. But we have a ship of a similar class, which you can see right here. And then the last ship we're going to talk about, you can see on the right, that's not the ship, the USS Milwaukee, but it's of the same class. So you're going to see a pretty similar configuration. Oh, and actually right over here is the Sturgeon Bay, which visited in 2018 as part of Fleet Week, coming just from Bayonne. But anyway, you're going to see a similar configuration of ships down in Staten Island, as you see right here. And so the Dependable, these are really kind of workhorses in the Coast Guard. These are what are called the Reliance class cutters. They're pretty small. They're 210 feet, and they are what are called medium endurance cutters. So they can go out to sea for a few weeks at a time. And they serve, all sorts of, law enforcement, maritime protection, border protection roles for the Coast Guard. These ships were actually built in the 1960s. They're some of the oldest, ships afloat in any of the American sea services. In fact, they're older than any ship in the U.S. Navy, save for the USS Constitution. And so these ships, still do a lot of work. They're pretty small, they're pretty cramped inside for the crews. And some of them are now pushing 60 years old. But again, this has been a long-term problem with the Coast Guard, is that ships keep getting older and older, and they're not replacing them, although that's starting to change now. In order to keep these 50-plus-year-old ships going, one of the places that they come is to GMD Shipyard in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. So here you can see the Coast Guard cutter Vigorous, which visited the yard. I think I took this picture in 2017, maybe 2018. But these Reliance class cutters are always coming in and out of the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and they fit nicely into Dry Dock 1, the smallest dry dock at the yard, which is about 300 feet long, and these are 210 feet. So the Brooklyn Navy Yard does not repair any Navy ships, but it does play an important role in repairing all number of Coast Guard ships. And I think right now there's 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 Coast Guard cutters that are being repaired at the yard. I haven't been over to the dry dock in a few days. But yeah, so this is one of the ships that's going to be visiting. And I mentioned before, when we talked about the Lawrence Lawson going on the parade of ships back in 2019, these ships right here, the Sentinel class cutters, these perform a slightly different mission, but they are filling a really important gap in the capability of the Coast Guard. These are what are called Sentinel class ships, and the Navy is building over 60 of them. And they have, as they say, shorter legs, shorter range than the Reliance class cutters, but they can perform a lot of important duties for law enforcement. And what these are doing is actually what's called force protection. So many of these Reliance class cutters, excuse me, these Sentinel class cutters, including this one right here, are in or on their way to Bahrain to protect the American Navy fleet there. This ship was actually just commissioned in New York City a few weeks ago. And so again, my membership in the Navy League, I served on the commissioning committee for this ship, which was, an incredible honor for me, but it was also really cool to, get to meet some of the officers and crew and, and see this ship in action. And so, yeah, these are built by Bollinger Shipyards, which is down in Louisiana as well, really the center of the American shipbuilding industry. So this was the first ship to be commissioned in either of the Navy or the Coast Guard to be commissioned in New York since the USS New York 11 years ago. We're going to have another ship that's going to be commissioned in New York in a few months, probably in November, it's looking like. And we're going to talk about that in a second because it is the same class of the next ship we're going to talk about, which is the USS Milwaukee. So this is coming back. It was here in 2019, and it's here now. This is LCS 5, and that stands for Littoral Combat Ship. This is one of the most troubled designs and really a hugely problematic program within the Navy. These ships were designed to operate in the littoral, meaning close to shore. And so they were designed to move very, very fast and operate in very shallow water, which would make sense if you're operating in a place like, for example, the Persian Gulf or in the islands of the island chains of the South China Sea and places like that. Makes a lot of sense. The problem is that the ships are very, very, we say, undergunned. So they do not have a whole lot of weaponry, and so, or what they call in the Navy. I try not to use too much military jargon, but what they call lethality, because they were designed, in the early 2000s when there was a belief that no country would really challenge American naval dominance, and we would not have to engage in ship-to-ship fights, basically, which was extremely short-sighted when you think about it. And so these ships have very, very little in terms of their offensive capability, and they're also very, very sinkable, frankly. They also have a lot of serious design problems with their propulsion system. And so almost every one of these, there are two classes of them. This is called the Freedom class. There's another one called the Independence class. The Navy basically couldn't decide between the two designs, and they also wanted to keep two shipyards operating. And so they picked both designs. This is the Freedom class, and there's the Independence class. So these are actually made in Marinette, Wisconsin. And the Independence class are made down in Alabama. But it's a highly, highly problematic design, and the Navy is really struggling to find a way to retrofit them to fulfill the needs of the Navy today. And so as a result, in their latest budget request for fiscal year 2023, the Navy basically wants to decommission all of these ships. Some of them are less than 2 years old, and they want to decommission them. They've already decommissioned LCS-1. And so this is just a dramatically terrible program, and has really set the Navy back hugely, because we've basically lost almost 2 decades of ship design and shipbuilding because of these stupid ships. Now, that's not to say anything about the men and women that serve aboard these ships. So I want to keep that in mind. And that's really what Fleet Week is about. But again, it illustrates some of the serious problems we've had by, going all in on some really, really bad and short-sighted designs. And so the Littoral Combat Ship is, example number one of the problems the Navy is facing in that regard. I mentioned that we're going to have another ship commissioning. So again, another ship of this class is coming online. We're continuing to build them, although in much, much smaller numbers than the Navy had originally planned. And so LCS, I think it's 21, if I'm not mistaken, is called the USS Cooperstown, which is going to be commissioned in New York or sorry, LCS 23 is going to be commissioned later this year, and hopefully it'll have a longer service life than 2 years. The Navy says they do have a handle on the propulsion problem as well, which is rendered many of these ships, including the Milwaukee, when it was coming up the Atlantic coast, completely dead in the water, complete loss of propulsion. So that's a big problem for a ship. So anyway, keep that in mind when you go and visit. Don't ask the sailors about it, because they do not want to answer questions about that, and that's also not their job. So anyway, it's unfortunate, but I can't help but think about that and talk about that when I ever see one of these ships. Oh, I just saw Joanne. We're going to wrap up right now, but Joanne, we hope we see you tomorrow. And I know many of the people that are I see on our participant list are going to be joining us tomorrow at our birthday party. But I just want to mention a couple things before we wrap up. Number one is that the Navy is always here in New York Harbor, and especially the Coast Guard is always here. So it doesn't just happen during Fleet Week over at the Bayonne Dry Dock. We frequently have ships visiting that are part of the Military Sea Lift Command. So these are civilian crewed and Navy-owned ships that move military supplies around the world. And then, like I mentioned, we have Coast Guard ships that frequently come and visit us at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. But remember that the Coast Guard is the largest military service here in New York Harbor. So they have a large presence over in Bayonne as well as on Staten Island. And so there are over 1,000 uniformed members of the Coast Guard here in the region. So, if you watch the harbor, you'll see all manner of Coast Guard ships, again, keeping the harbor safe and running. So keep that in mind. But we hope that you have the opportunity this week to go and visit some of these ships or participate in some of the programming for Fleet Week. If you go to our website, we just posted, it's at the top of our blog. We have a little guide to Fleet Week, and there's a link in there, which we'll also share on the show page. But check it out, because the Navy League has a great comprehensive calendar of all the things that are going on. And also you can find out more about that great organization. So thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope if you're able to make it, if you're in the region, that you can come and visit us tomorrow at our anniversary party. And maybe some of you I will also see on Memorial Day for the Fleet Week Harbor Cruise. But we will see you next in the virtual realm on June 13th, when we're going to do our program all about the history of the cardboard box in Brooklyn. So it should be really interesting. And I'm also looking forward, because I'm actually going to be hosting some members of the Gare family, of the famous Robert Gare company that was very instrumental in the story we're going to tell about the revolution in packaging that took place in the late 19th century. But thank you all so much, and we will see you either in person or online very, very soon. Thanks so much.